So good evening. I'm Robert Polito, Director of the New School Writing Program, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to Red, White, and Blue, Poets on Politics, an evening that originated with our close literary partners, the Poetry Society of America, and promises to be another dynamic event in our long-standing collaboration with the PSA. Red, White, and Blue is a national series of the PSA with a lively program last month in Los Angeles and forthcoming programs in Chicago, Houston, and DC. Alice Quinn, Executive Director of the PSA, regrets that she can't be here tonight, so it's my honor to welcome you on her behalf as well. Writing tends to find its own defense in pleasure. Yet at the turn of the 21st century, the actions we perform in our workshops and literature seminars turns out to be oddly social and political. We live in a culture that doesn't wish us to pay close attention to much of anything, a culture that increasingly assumes we aren't paying close attention, that increasingly assumes, in fact, that we don't know how. As a consequence of this relentless fictionalizing of our history, as well as of the omnipresence of the internet, the ordinary experience of the ordinary global citizen more and more resembles a life inside a modernist novel or a modernist epic poem, Joyce, Stein, Eliot, Beckett, or Pound. The once radical innovations of modernist literature, unreliable narrators, multiple voices, fragmentation, collage, ricocheting allusions, and the instabilities of language and identity now are the expected conventions of our daily life, whether at home, in office, or en route. Close reading, or reading in slow motion, is an act of resistance to this information age that turns out to be the best preparation for living inside it. Attentive to the nuances of the real medium of literature, language, the close reading of poems and stories opens out into history and furnishes a ready template for the close reading of other social and political verbal performances, such as speeches, news reports, advertisements, and blogs, and can in turn be extended to other media, images, photographs, music, and films. Modern writers have often spoken of their writing as a sort of model for democracy. Recall Whitman announcing, "I contain multitudes." The composition of a self in a modernist literary work through and against the medley of voices competing for attention and representation offers provocative analogs for contemporary politics. For someone lost inside the complexity of our various inventions and technologies, there are the media-saturated fictions of Joyce's Ulysses, the celebrity dramatization of Stein's Everybody's Autobiography, and the collages of Eliot and Pound poems. Tonight's program explores the role of politics in the literary landscape. What I've just briefly sketched is just one of the roles, and as you'll hear, there are many, many others. It's my pleasure now to turn the evening over to Daryl Alejandro Holness, Poet PSA Programs Director. Please join me now in welcoming Daryl.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you, the New School, and thank you, Lori Lynn Turner, as well, for her help on this program tonight. The late poet Adrienne Rich was a poet of conviction and one of this nation's most dynamic and provocative voices of our time. Rich wrote and read as if her life depended on it, and her words read like an index of American life with urgent address and sharp poignancy on various civil, social, and political topics. Lying is also done with silence, she once spoke. And tonight, we dedicate the night to her and speak out about the role of politics in today's literary landscape, asking questions and telling truths about the nature of this beast. For our bodies to be treated as objects, our minds are in mortal danger, Rich also said. And perhaps tonight, someone will be rescued, or in the least, see the lighthouse where others have found refuge in verse, in words, in politics. This year, the Poetry Society of America presents Red, White, and Blue Poets on Politics, a program series spanning the nation culminating in the final program in Washington, D.C., merely days before the election. And tonight, with the New School, we present 4 distinguished poets from New York City: C.A. Conrad, Filip Marinovich, Eileen Myles, and Patricia Smith. A round of applause to welcome our poets to the stage. C.A. Conrad is the recipient of the Gil Ott Book Award for the Book of Frank, and most recently, a 2011 Pew Fellowship by the Pew Center for Arts and Heritage, and a 2012 UCross Fellow. He co-edits Frequency, audio journal with Magdalena Zurowska. He'll tell you how to pronounce that when he comes up here. Zurowski, thank you. And edits the 9 for 9 Project, an online video poetry journals, Jupiter 88 and Paranormal Poetics. His most recent book is A Beautiful Marsupial Afternoon, New Somatics, on Wave Books Press, released this year. Filip Marinovich worked at the People's Library at Occupy Wall Street and co-founded the Occupy Wall Street Poetry Anthology with Stephen Boyer. Marinovich is a poet and playwright. His most recent poetry book is And If You Don't Go Crazy, I'll Meet You Here Tomorrow on Ugly Duckling Press, and the forthcoming Wolfman Librarian. He wrote and directed the plays Skin Around the Earth, Throne Room, Snow, and The Karma Bookshop for his theater company Comet Party. Eileen Myles was born in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and moved to New York City in 1974 to be a poet. She has published more than 20 collections of poetry, fiction and nonfiction, plays and libretti, including Sorry, Tree, Chelsea Girls, Not Me, Skies, The New Fuck You, Adventures in Lesbian Reading, Cool for You, The Importance of Being Iceland, Travel Essays in Art, for which she received a Creative Capital Warhol Foundation Art Writers Grant. Inferno, a poet's novel which won a Lambda Book Award, and most recently Snowflake, Different Streets, on Wave Books as well. She is a 2009 recipient of the Shelley Prize from the Poetry Society of America. Patricia Smith is the author of 6 acclaimed poetry volumes, including Should Have Been Jimmy Savannah, Blood Dazzler, a finalist for the 2008 National Book Award, and Tea House of the Almighty, a National Poetry Series selection. Her work has been published in Poetry, The Paris Review, Tin House, Strike Quarterly, and the 2011 editions of both Best American Poetry and the Best American Essays. She is a professor at the City University of New York and serves on the faculties of Cave Canem and the Stone Coast and Sierra Nevada College low residency MFA programs. The poets each have books for sale at the end of the program, so keep that in mind, and they will each begin now by reading a few poems and offering some commentary. We'll start off with C.A. Conrad.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. Very excited to be here with all these amazing poets. So I want to read a piece from my new book, and when I was thinking about what to read, I'm just going to read this one piece, but I just want to briefly say that. Well, I mean, I just have to say, I don't think anything has upset me more in the last decade than to see the gay and lesbian community of America fall right into the wrong side of history by embracing a multi-billion-dollar military-industrial complex. And I'm just horrified. I'm absolutely horrified that the things are turning out the way they are, and incredibly disturbed. 3 children dying every day of war-related injuries in Afghanistan, and last year, Afghanistan became the most dangerous country on the planet for women, and this is something to embrace. I mean, right after the invasion of Baghdad in spring equinox of 2003, the HRC just went right into this campaign for repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and there was absolutely no question whatsoever whether this was an illegal war or not. And I'm mortified. I've never been so ashamed of being gay in my life. And so I wanted to read this piece for my boyfriend Tommy. He died of AIDS in the early 90s, and a friend of ours was visiting, and she said, "Well, what do you think Tommy would have thought about gay people just embracing this military while there's a gay genocide going on in Iraq right now? You know, there's an extermination program for gay men that's a halal that Sunni and Shiite clerics have both called for. So, something, by the way, that our president and secretary of state have not mentioned once. You know, it's like Reagan not saying the word AIDS for 8 years. But, I mean, genocide is not a word to throw around lightly, and it's not being thrown around lightly. That's exactly what it is. And I said to her, I said, I have no idea how he would react, except it's just, I'm glad that he's not here to see it, you know, in a way, because it's just too shameful. So this book of mine, I love my new book so much. What a segue. And I really do. It just came out. Today's its official release date, I believe. And, oh, thank you. After a ton of recycled paper saves 17 trees, and this is 100% recycled paper. I like the math of that. So what this book is a collection of 27 somatic exercises, these rituals that I create and I put myself through. And this is one that I did for Tommy. I'll just read it. It's self-explanatory. And then there's a resulting poem. And the title of the exercise is AIDS Snow Family. For anyone who loves someone who died of AIDS. Quote, the poem is restorative rather than fragmenting, unquote, Alexander Grillicus. In January, gather snow. This is intimate. This calling to honor the shock of being alive. I made one tiny snowman named C.A. Conrad and one tiny snowman named Tommy Schneider. For 6 months, they held hands in the privacy of my freezer while I visited the streets and buildings in the Philadelphia of our love. Snow crystals travel miles out of clouds into the light of our city. My snowman read to his snowman the letters I brought home to the freezer. It's 2010. AIDS is different in this century you didn't live to see. The used bookshop where you worked on South Street is now a clothing store. Our first kiss in the poetry section is a rack of blue jeans, and I resist hooking my thumbs into the belt loops to pull you in. I feel you everywhere today. In March, an old friend was visiting, and she said, but you wrote poems for Tommy after he died. I said, but it's sublime retracing our love in this exercise. She shook her head. No, it's sad. It's very sad. Can't you see this beautiful day? Of course I see the beautiful day. In fact, I see it more than ever, and I don't need her choreography to enter it. The point of experiencing love is to engage the greater openings. It's important to ignore the directives of others when investigating the way these doors swing open on their hinges. Months of spring into summer, my snowman told your snowman the memories. One night, you had asked if I was upset at something. I said, I have no right to complain. All the men are dying in our city and I don't have AIDS. You said, well, I have no right to complain because I have a wonderful boyfriend who loves me and I do have AIDS. Macrobiotics, herbal infusions, massages, sensory deprivation tanks, reflexology, music by Soft Cell, music by Susie and the Banshees, music by Cocteau Twins, music by Patti Smith. Of course we're all dying. You'll never kiss someone who isn't dying, I know that, which is why the fear of this is not allowed to stop me from missing you the way I want. The streets were filled with men in wheelchairs that year. We were kids in love while you vanished in the funnel with them. The day after summer solstice, I took our snowmen out of the freezer. 90 degrees. We melted quicker than expected. Even sooner than I could have imagined. I burned the letters, mixed their ash with our slush, and I read to the puddle a poem that came to me years ago in a dream soon after you died. He wrote, I have AIDS and kissed this wall. X marked the spot. I wrote, I'm not afraid, and kissed him back wherever he is. I took many notes during the life of our snowmen in the freezer until they vanished. Those notes became a poem, and I'm going to read the poem. It's called Qualm Cutting and Assemblage for Tommy Schneider. Quote, what do you think of the cosmic proletariat? Unquote. Deborah Morgan. Deshrouded against a ton of ears, a 5-pound song broke them all. It is rare to remember where we are from. Listen, I am on Earth, not sure how long. Our documents under rubble, an hour prying this fucking drawer open to find handles and screws instead of your poem. We came into the quiet like we had to survive their ridicule, to die in their sleeping conscience, bleeding as when bathed in the hunt. You find me with kisses, face a spoken promise. The written has been burned, only a memory can perish. Every cell resold the sharpest set of incisors. Viruses are hungry too, you said. Our documents shot into outer space. What is more fortunate than the will to proceed, bliss cascading in the candy you make as a sword gathers me into the solitude, cradling a 5-pound song for you in my ear. I hate many but won't halt loving you. Set this down to know a little nighttime heads macaroni tails execution. Edit our bigger part of credit. The cop Frank O'Hara, not the poet Frank O'Hara, told us stop getting naked in the bushes together. He's going to have to arrest us. He's going to have to arrest us. He's trying so hard to be nice, remembering half-finished poems falling off the table, falling off the truck, falling off the cliff. What's that fucking cliff trying to do to us? This is how it feels. Traffic lights and dark and rain. No cars, even pink hat and sidewalk drain. It's the comfort you get sometimes. I molded my body around you to hold your winter to a sanctum of flame. We agree to ignore the deafening knock lingering at dollhouse doors. Large sentimental songs at dollhouse doors. Dolls yelling, fuck off, and anger traces the outline of each it enters. It is and is not a private act to involve the thawing choir. Our bones, our muscles get rising to 1 and 2 breaths. The common lung, this world a mouth into a mouth, breathing back and forth. So then, mouth sings to mouth, so then mouth sings to mouth, so then all night, so then a day, then a day, so.
Next, we'll have Filip Marinovich.
Thanks for having me, Daryl. I'm absolutely horrified to read this poem because I just wrote it yesterday afternoon. But I think that it would be more political to read it and be horrified than to go with the greatest hit, because I hate greatest hits packages, and I love the albums, and I love the B-sides, and I love all those weird little outtakes that happen, and the shrieks and everything. Instead of going to Sunday service yesterday, I found myself at the beer hall in Williamsburg. And before that, I went to a bookstore across the street called Book Thug, and they had this beautiful Brecht collected poems, and I was flipping through that, and it seemed perfect to go to the beer hall afterward and hear some jazz. But some horrifying things came up. It was kind of like an act of like operating on myself. I felt like I was sort of in an operating theater where I was both myself and the polis, and this kind of flash happened, and this diagnostic picture came out. How to be alienation. You have to open yourself up. They give you a piece of undercooked chicken at Ella. Who is they? You won't say. It is a cowardly they. You have to say the constellation is composed of the counterman you were rude to. You said, give me the pen that works when signing your credit card bill. And he said, it does work. You just have to press. And you pressed, and it did work, the red pen, and it was good. You have to end-stop your lines more and see into the nature of your stomach lining. In the beer hall, men talk as men do. You have to write it down. He's a writer, the Polish man next to me says. He is an owl, and laughs. Down! Send it to the man! A horse! Send the man a horse! A wire, children! A wire, villain! And my friend said earlier, your medicine is getting clear and strong. And at the beer hall now, I am invaded by the spirit of Bert Brecht. He is all gathered up into a point of crystal precum at the tip of my dick. He is teaching at Naropa this summer. Will you go see him? My apprenticeship is exploding in my own face. I keep taking workships, but I am in a spaceship taking care of the spaceship hygiene. I am the janitor of this spaceship. What is it called? Little whore, the Polish man says next to me in Polish, mala kurwa. It sounds so sweet. I really want to be the little whore he speaks of. Kako się znamo, he asks. We know each other from many lifetimes when he was the one giving it to me, his big blonde Polish cock, and I was the one taking it in the rear so I could give a talk on it in pentameter to academics who would give me tenure right now. Tenure, so I could live. A tenor, the fifth great tenor. The fourth tenor is death. Pavarotti, Domingo, Carreras, Death, and me, we sing in an Italian stadium whose name we know not, but it is La Donna Mobile and batshit crazy, and I am La Donna Mobile and batshit crazy. I am the demon sexist, drinking beer at this table and cursing myself and curing myself as the Polish men beside me call me a little whore and say, he is writing. What is he? Clean smarts, clean smarty pants found among the mussel shells that cling to the jetty? You little whore, what are you writing? Are you a spy taking us into the deeps with your scuba tank so we can smell your whore butt at the sea bottom, your bottom, and you would give us the bends for rising too fast from the depths of your poem? But we are your poem. There is no poem without us, the Polish drunks. And they are right. I am the Polish drunk and the little whore so named by the Polish drunks, and my golden credit card waits behind the bar. I keep the tab open so the wooden soldiers march to my table with a tray of beers over which I pray before I drink them. Is anyone sitting here? Is this table free? I am not here. I am only here because of the string music now being played by the Polish friends beside me. I don't know them, but one says he thinks he can write us down and keep writing, but I don't want to write anyone down. With my whole soul, I just want to illuminate what is happening before me right now. Whore. Is whore a form of punctuation in this language they speak between themselves only? Whore ear, he has a whore ear. The wooden beer hall tables are moving without thought, growing wings and lifting up. And we are on board. We are flying, all of us. We are whores the sun has paid for. We are gone to be solar flares for the sun. The sun has paid for us. You can see by the sunspots in us. Us. Spots. Spots. Who said spots? I don't have spots. I am spotted by the sun above and the sun in me. Will the two suns speak? They are speaking inside of me, but I have to grow two mouths to hear them. To overhear their dialogue solar, I have to grow 3 more ears and 2 more mouths. When I do the solar math, I will know how to masking tape these masking tape wings to my shoulders and fly too close to the sun up there with the sun in me burning me. The sun in me already burnt off my wings, but I had to go fly up to the sun to confirm with it. Yes, the wings are burned off, and this is the confirmation of a Sunday. This is the confirmation whereby I burn a new skylight into the beer hall roof so the Sunday sunlight can shine through it. And no, I too am a sun. I am the 3rd sun with my sunspots, with my solar flares. I am messing up your computers so you can send emails only to yourselves, so we can learn to talk to ourselves again, a cure for paralysis. How do we move even though we are paralyzed, even through our paralysis? We are Americans and we have figured out how to do it. We know how to do it even though it is impossible. The impossible is our specialty, and my 3 friends beside me rise from the table and part chanting, whore, whore, whore. They are 3 black suns. They are the 3 suns now. Everybody gets a chance to be the 3 suns. My 3 sons, even Dick Van Dyke has found his way into my eardrums to say, hi, Filip Marinovich, who cares what you have come from Serbia to illuminate us with? You are just a pair of eardrums with a whole lot of hot air between them. And now Dick Van Dyke puppet closes his mouth, and I end this ventriloquism to talk to you, son above the wooden beer hall roof. My 3 Polish friends have left me. I have nothing to say. I wish they would come back, drag me to the beer hall bathroom to gangbang me, and Brecht would join them after his descent from the sun, where he is teaching the flames how to be alienation and why it is important to know how to be it in the spontaneous combustion of our collective education. Humans, humans, humans. Thank you.
Thank you, CA. Thank you, Philip. Next, we have Eileen Myles.
Hi. Well, this is great to be. This is great to be here and to be trying to figure out what the hell political means when everything seems political and. Just, you know, when Daryl said the late Adrienne Rich, I was like, wow, I've never heard that before. Suddenly Adrienne Rich is late, you know? And it seemed like the reading was taking place in a different world. And I feel like that's part of the problem with the political and poetry is that it's always a different world. I mean, it's like poetry is so fast and it still can't catch up to the current situation, so that you're always reading these old poems about a situation that already passed. I feel like the word activist. My obsession has been with activist judges lately, you know, as we're watching the Supreme Court potentially yank away this kind of flawed health insurance law, you know, and you know, years ago when the right first claimed the word activist or first used it aggressively towards the judges who were starting to get shot for supposedly just simply holding different opinions from them, and now the whole Supreme Court is just, you know, it's like, why is nobody calling the Supreme Court activist? You know, it's so crazy when they're sitting, you know, they're gonna do a coup #2 over the Congress of the United States and over the people and our right to have health care, you know? So I feel like it's such a you know, and the emo kids, I mean, it's like, it's almost worse than gay, it's style, you know? It's sort of like kids are being killed because their style looks suspiciously unconventionally masculine, so that equals queer, right? You know, let's you know, hit their heads with cement blocks. So it's such a strange, it's like a jerking off. I don't know. Sorry, it's such a strange time that nothing is absolutely stable, and it seems like as poets we're like activist language workers. I mean, I feel like that's what we're sort of trying to do, is endlessly destabilize the language so that it momentarily is applicable to the world that we live in. So I think that my poems, I mean, and so are you even just thinking about what to read? It's like the poems that were political at 5:30 didn't seem quite right at 6:15, you know? And so these are the ones that seem right at 20 of 8. And I feel I've been writing in little series a lot, or not a lot, but somewhat in the past few years. So first it was about being in California and driving and being in a car and being in, you know, like in the need as a poet to be like writing in the moment, which meant, you know, like having a notebook on my thigh and writing and thinking you're going to die for this little poem. So I started to record poems. And I'll read some of those, but then later on I just found I went to a play in New York, and there was like a fine fat pencil, you know, that was like that you would sign in on the mailing list, and I was like, I have to keep this pencil, this is like my next, you know, series of poems. So that fat pencil produced a whole series of poems too, but so this is one of those. That fat political pencil. Pencil number 4. A dog walks into a barber shop. I'm not into gender. Okay, says the barber, so don't think of me as a bitch, but just one of your regular customers who wants to do something a little different. I'm okay with that, says the barber. Hot towels warm my head, smelling of mint, warm lather on my neck. Woof, woof, you're a dog. No, I'm not, and I bit him. Pencil poem number 2. Is it wrong to think you're getting excited? He pulls the window down on the golden and brown. Now I remember, when I began to speak like him. I mime. So now we're in the car. Number 10, ball. Is there anything about oil we don't know already? Like we're driving on our own limited past, something that's ancient, like the history of this ball we're driving these cars on, the fluid of everything and everybody that ever was here. We're draining that just to get around. And it's nice that I could feel around in the dark to say these things, to touch a button, to make it light, and then go out. This is called The Importance of Being Iceland. It seems the color is constant on the sun. Storms every few hours, and the storms are bright. It even gets translated here. On the beach, I'm remembering yesterday's paper described as snap, and those colors come down to us once in a while through something like a windsock. When I lived in San Diego, everyone was gay. In my neighborhood, it was all about selling. They came to our door and offered us a windsock. The waves are rolling and the sun comes out. It said, I am gay too. Soon those people were gone. They called them flippers, gay flippers. Gone their rainbow socks. It's a snap. The colors come rushing down the tunnel straight to here. Not where I sit, but in Iceland sometime. Glenn told me about a woman who waited her whole life to watch the aurora borealis. She was here. It didn't happen. Scientists now understand the nature of the particles rustling through the sock. The snap occurs first. The color comes later. If I sold my house in San Diego sooner, I'd be rich. The woman wasn't standing there to watch the sky change color. I mean, it would have been nice. A dish of light forms an enormous pancake called day across the sea, and some lights over the front of my legs, like a cartoon I draw. I'm trying to concentrate on the bull, not the language of selling, like it said in the paper. Am I the bull? And I think I'm going to step out of that enormous silence. Thank you.
You have to come all the way from the back of the room.
I like saying your name.
Oh, well.
Thank you, Eileen. Next we have Patricia Smith.
Hi. Thank you, Daryl. Appreciate it. Very glad to be here. I was trying to go through my work and decide, every once in a while the specter of the political poem raises its ugly head and you try to figure out, actually what am I doing? Being rooted as an artist. And I was looking through my work and I just finished, back in 2008 I had a book of poems published that were about Hurricane Katrina. And I thought, well, maybe I'll talk about that a little bit. But I was at a middle school the other day, and they kept asking me for this poem, which I wasn't sure that I could do because of content. And I realized that the poem is over 2 decades old. So you do the new one, I'll do the old one. I also realized that if you're an African-American woman, every time you stand and face someone and open your mouth and sound comes out, you're pretty much being political. So this is, I'll talk about this when I'm done with it. They call me skinhead, and I got my own beauty. It is knife scrawled across my back in sore, jagged letters. It is in the way my eyes snap away from the obvious. I sit in my dim matchbox, on the edge of a bed, tousled with my ragged smell, slide razors across my hair, count how many ways I can bring blood closer to the surface of my skin. These are the duties of the righteous, the ways of the anointed. The face that moves in my mirror is huge and pockmarked, apple-cheeked, scraped pink and brilliant. I am filled with my own spit. 2 years ago, a machine that slices leather sucked in my hand and held it, whacking off 3 fingers at the root. I didn't feel nothing until I looked down and saw them on the floor next to my boot heel, and I ain't worked since then. I sit here and watch niggers take over my TV set, walking like kings up and down the sidewalks in my head, walking like their fat black mamas named them freedom, while my shoulders tell me that ain't right. So I sit here in the sun, where that beauty makes me lower my head, or into the night with a lead pipe up my sleeve, a razor in my boot. I was born to make things right. It's easy now to bend my big body into shadows, to move from a place where there was nothing into the stark circle of a streetlight, the pipe raised up high over my head. It's a kick to watch their eyes get big, round and gleaming like cartoon jungle boys, just in that second before they know the pipe's gonna come down. And I got this thing I like to say, hey, listen to this. I like to say, hey, nigger, Abe Lincoln's been dead a long time. I get hard listening to their skin burst. I was born to make things right. Then this reporter comes around. Seems I was a little sloppy kicking some fag's ass, and he opens up and screams about it. So the reporter finds me at home in bed. The TV flashes, licking my face clean. Same old shit. Ain't got no job. The coloreds and spics got 'em. Why ain't I working? Look at my hand, asshole. No, I'm not part of no organized group. I'm just a white boy who loves this race, fighting for a pure country. Sometimes it's just me. Sometimes 3, sometimes 30. AIDS will take care of the faggots. Then it's going to be white on black in the streets. Then there'll be 3 million. I tell him that. So he writes it up. And I come off looking like I'm some kind of goddamn freak, like I'm Hitler himself. I ain't that lucky, but I got my own beauty. It's in my steel-toed boots, in the hard corners of my shaved head. I look in the mirror, and I hold up my mangled hand. Only the baby finger left. I know it's the wrong finger, but fuck you all anyway. I'm riding the top rung of the perfect race, my face scraped pink and brilliant. I'm your baby, America, your boy. Drunk on my own spit, I am goddamn fucking beautiful. And I was born and raised right here. That back in the late 80s, I think it was, yeah, early 90s maybe. Someone painted a swastika on Plymouth Rock. Now, if you have been to New England, if you know anyone in New England, if you have been past New England, if you have ever said the words New England, you know that you do not mess with the rock. People lost their minds. I mean, they were just like, we've got to lynch someone, you know. I'm sure they said that. They couldn't find the person who did it, but they traced it to a group, and the group was called the White Youth League. It was this Aryan Nation group. And they couldn't, so they had an interview with this representative of this group, and he was spewing all this hatred. I hate blacks, I hate Jews, I hate gays. And the role of the artist is very strange. I mean, obviously you could read this thing and you either agree or you don't. You can either say, oh, he's got a point, or you can say, what an idiot, and you move on with your life. But when I saw it, I thought, he started here, I started here, and for some reason, he went that way and I went this way. And what I wanted to do was try to create something in my head that would pull us both back to center so that I could turn and take a very close look at him. And now that I think about it, whenever something angers me or saddens me in that way, and this has a lot to do with things that I write that I guess could be considered political, is I try to find some human face in there somewhere, because it's easy to hate and rant and go, I'm against that, I'm for that, whatever. but it doesn't begin to make real sense unless you humanize it somehow. So that was the basis of the piece I just did. Okay, that's it.
Thank you, four fabulous poets. Are you guys ready for a conversation? Are you guys ready for a conversation?
Mic check.
Are you
Hello.
ready for a conversation?
Thank you. So poetry dates back to ancient times. Some date it back 4,000 years. Is politics somewhat innate to poetry as it is innate to the human condition? Where do we see this considering our literary predecessors? Who are your literary predecessors?
I'm very proud to be sitting right next to one of my favorite poets who I sought out when, I don't know, 1991, I think. And you were just incredibly generous. And it's funny because I went into the place where the poetry project and everybody seemed kind of like, no, we're not going to give you your phone number. And then I just called information and then I got her number and then she answered the phone, Eileen Myles. And yeah, boom. Who's next? I mean, it's amazing. What can I say? I love sitting next to Eileen. I feel like my real life has exceeded my dreams in that way.
All I can do is make sappy noises and head gestures. That's really great, but I was hoping you would say that. I guess to mix, obvious ones like Jimmy Schuyler, who I work for and whose work I loved, and John Wieners, who's from Boston, and I could hear, like poets from Massachusetts, I can hear a Boston accent in their writing, and I feel like I write in that accent. Judy Grahn, whose work just seemed sort of kind of naked and public all at once, and
do you think there's something in the politic of their work that spoke to you, or in what ways do you guys consider these literary predecessors relevant to kind of what you're doing today and what you're doing overall in your careers?
Do you mind me saying something about you in that?
No.
Well, I was having a really hard time, and I came across Sappho's Boat, which was your first book, right? It's
my first officially queer book.
Okay. And it just completely, it's just a very hard time being young and queer, growing up in rural Pennsylvania. And it just completely blew my mind. And it made me feel like, you don't have to kill yourself. You don't have to, like, there's really, there was just this excitement that was almost like Rimbaud at times in that book, like the power of moving through the city and getting up and the light. And anyway, it just it was exhilarating. And then Not Me came out, and soon, because I didn't discover Sappho's Boat when it first came out, and when Not Me came out, it was like nothing I'd ever read in my life. And I'd met Molly Russakoff, and she turned me on to your work too, further. And people like Joseph Tiravolo and Alison Otley. It's pretty amazing.
It sounds like there was something about Eileen's courage that gave you a lot of courage.
Yeah, completely.
And Eileen, where does your courage come from?
Oh my God. Where does my courage come from? I mean, I'm like a terrified person, and I feel like, and what I'm most terrified is getting locked in with my terror and being still, and not being able to move out of it. So I think there's a kind of combination of fear and panic that I've been lucky enough to put together, and it helps me move. And writing seemed like a default position because there were so many things I wanted to do in my life to be able to get out of what I perceived as a certain kind of fearful stuckness. And as I got a little bit older, it seemed like the only thing I was actually doing was writing poems. So it suddenly occurred to me that might be the medium, you know. And then when I read poets who, you know, who did something that made it be, I mean, because part of the question of being alive is, for me, is a question of adulthood, like what constitutes adulthood, and so many things I am, female and queer, and the class background I come from, and et cetera, made me not know what an adult version of this would look like. Wouldn't I always be sort of a stuck kid in some way, or an impaired human being or something? So when I saw writers who had a certain kind of shakiness that was almost like particles moving that were neither here nor there, or showed something pretty that reminded me of childhood and yet had moved forward into an adult sexuality too somehow, you know, like, so people who sort of mixed it up in some way so that it was both indeterminate and possible made me think I can go there too and make some mix that would hold all these things and not be stuck to, you know. So a lot of it is not figuring out how to not be static.
Right. And I imagine stepping into persona must require a lot of courage as well, Patricia.
I have to go back to my predecessors. I have to like back up a little bit, because I've been sitting here thinking about it, and it's something I thought about kind of surprised me, and then I'll talk about persona. Is good? My mom and dad, my mom came up from Alabama, my dad from Arkansas, came to Chicago, kind of funneled into this one neighborhood that then became one of the country's largest ghettos. But my father brought with him what I call the tradition of the back porch, I guess, that every day, you know, they worked in a candy factory, and the people in the candy factory became characters, and I was an only child, so we'd sit down and he'd tell a story every night that would start off where the one ended the night before. So I learned to think of the world in terms of the stories it could tell. So I think that my father is pretty much why I became a writer in the first place. And as far as poets, because I was a first generation up north, and I wanted to seek stories that were like mine, I'd have to say Gwendolyn Brooks. And then I have to say Smokey Robinson. Just, you know, it's clear. I'm a Motown baby, and a lot of my stories, all of my ideas about life, love, and romance pretty much were defined by whatever Motown song was out at the time.
Is Cruisin' about the Great Migration?
The Cruisin'. It could be.
Could be.
Oh, and then the one I deny all the time. You do these interviews and people say, well, who's your favorite poet? Who are your influences? And for a while, you know, you think, depending on the audience, you say, well, I better name the African American influences because I think that's what people are, you know. And I have to say that a poet who really influenced me for a long time was Stephen Dobbins. I picked up a book of his before I knew who I was supposed to be reading. And it's like he writes about all those tiny horrors that happen in our lives that we pave over. And it kind of gave me permission to pull the skin back on those a little bit and take another look at them. So that was it. The persona thing, I got introduced to poetry by getting up on stage and doing it. And so primary to all that was looking for an unexpected entry point, because actually when you sat down to write something, I always envisioned the 800 people sitting down to write the exact same poem with the exact same idea.
Yeah.
And so I started to spend more time just thinking, how can I enter this poem to make the story mean something to me, and also to get people to kind of sit up and go, oh, is that same story? You know, and for a long time, persona did that. But it was, I got hooked on it. You know, I was writing everything in persona. You know, it was just like, oh, let's see, maybe from the point of view of the rubber band this time, you know. It was just crazy. And then as I went on, I realized that it's a tool like everything else. You know, sometimes poems ask for it, sometimes they don't. Sometimes it's a really effective choice, sometimes it isn't. I thought in terms of writing about the skinhead, it was effective because part of the tension in the poem comes from hearing his voice coming from an African-American woman. So if you're watching it, it's just kind of like, wow, ooh, what's going on, you know? So yeah, there is a lot of power in it when it's time for it.
Right. And what about you, Filip?
Popeye. Because my grandfather would tell me stories about Popeye, and Popeye as a sailor sailing around the Adriatic and having all these adventures. And this one particular Popeye story was my favorite, and he would tell me that one all the time. And it was a story of Popeye sailing by these sirens in a boat, and his mates had to tie him to the mast and plug their ears so they wouldn't hear the song. Only much later did I recognize that was Homer. But it was great. It was like he was Homer, my grandfather. That's what Homer is. It's just like, you know, the passing on, the stitching together. I think it even means to stitch together. Or there's not some etymology in the name Homer that means to stitch together. So I think it's that act of stitching together stories, changing them, passing them around, this big collaborative project, like Shelley says in the Defense of Poetry, that we're all writing one big collaborative poem, just like one big jam session happening, and that poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world through that kind of collaborative storytelling.
And in thinking about the ways in which we all enter this larger political conversation in poetry, CA, in your answers to the online questionnaire that we have for Red, White, and Blue, which you guys can check out at poetrysociety.org, you mentioned that it's important for a poet to acknowledge his or her own complicity in American politics as a poet who is also a tax-paying American citizen. To what extent is examining one's own positionality a necessary part of having a voice in any political discussion, be it through poetry or other mediums, and what of shifting positions as the discussions evolve?
I just feel like we're dealing with a level of dishonesty right now that is it's gruesome. And I can't even believe that we're where we are. I mean, it's, if anybody's been paying attention to the genocide going on in Iraq right now, I mean, they're hunting down these gay men, and they super glue their assholes shut, and then they force feed them X-Lax until their innards explode, and then they chop their heads off. And it's sanctioned by the government that's there. It's sanctioned by the clerics. And we're responsible for that. I mean, there are young women that I heard interviewed who were like middle-class Iraqi girls had been accepted into art school, and they heard that we might bomb, and they thought that was stupid. And then, of course, we did, and we burned their school down, and then they were having to cover their heads for the first time. I really don't understand how we can look at the picture, the photographs of the bombing of Baghdad in 2003, and not think together about the closeted lesbians and gay men who were in the military who did that. Because who cares whether they're closeted or not, really? They paved the way for this incredible thing that's going on right now. I mean, and I believe that gay and lesbian America has Stockholm Syndrome.
So,
frankly.
Would you say that you feel that as a queer writer, you feel obligated to consider this and to address it?
Yes. There's a new anthology that just came out called Why Are Faggots So Afraid of Faggots? From AK Press, one of my favorite presses. And Matilda Bernstein Sycamore is the editor, incredible editor. And that book is a blessing because it feels so lonely sometimes, like when especially if I'm at in a political discussion, or this is fine, nobody in the audience is mad or yelling at me, but I have been in plenty of cases where, it's always young gay men who freak out on me, and, they say things like, well, what about gay and lesbian working class people who want to get an education, go to college? And the military is a good option. I said, well, why don't you start a fund for them? Why are you upholding centuries of oppression of the poor? Nobody's asking rich kids to risk their lives and the lives of others for college. And I'm just so tired of this conversation that it just seems to circle around and it goes nowhere. And I'm sick of it.
So when thinking about the ways that we write about these topics and considering perspective and privilege, I know that that's privilege is a term that you use, Patricia, when you're talking a lot about persona. Can you expand upon it and maybe define how privilege relates to that?
When I started to write about Katrina, I set out to write one poem, and there was the story that pushed at me the most was the story about the 34 nursing home residents who were left behind to die. And I was doing that poem somewhere, and there was a woman in the audience, and she was just very jumpy. And I asked her later what the problem was, and she said, well, they had Mardi Gras, didn't they? And it reminded me of how much we want to be on to the next big thing. That people didn't want to they didn't want to look at Katrina, they didn't want to see any more images, they didn't want to see any more poor black women being lifted in baskets. It was enough. That was it. We need something else now. But when I started to write, one of the questions that most of the poems were in persona, including Katrina was personified in the book. One of the questions I had, I'm not from the Gulf region. I don't have any really firm connections with the Gulf region. I saw Katrina unfold the same way most of America did. But I wondered if in taking on that story and in working a lot in persona, if I was exerting a type of privilege in taking on those voices and saying that, you know, for this moment in these pages, I'm going to be the person who tells the story. And I encounter that a lot. I mean, I think that's where there's a line now in almost everything that I write, and I have to make a conscious decision to step over that line and to really inhabit the story. And most of the times there's stories that aren't inherently mine. You know, so when I think about privilege, it's, I mean, there were writers in the Gulf region who told that story, and I cannot approach, you know, their perspective. There's nothing like being there when the wind started to blow and the rain started to fall. Plus there's a very textured cultural backdrop to the Gulf region that I'm not privy to. So the things that they were going to write were not going to be the things I was going to write. But on the other hand, I'm now going into classrooms where I have to tell them what Katrina is before I do any of the poems. You know, so if somebody picks up a book, you know, my book in a remainder bin or something, if they don't even buy it, they just turn it around and say, oh, that's right, Katrina happened, then I think the choices that I made in writing the book were probably warranted.
So in thinking about ownership and possibly even entitlement, how can one's own privilege or entitlement help or hurt the practice of writing poetry? That's for all of the panelists to answer.
I don't feel entitled. I don't know if this is even addressing that in the way that you mean, but there's a strange hierarchy in any art, but in poetry, you know, when you introduce someone and you say, and this person has this award and has published in this place, well, you know, if I'm in Paterson, New Jersey, and I'm in a high school, they could care less, you know. So you kind of have to keep fighting down those divisions a little bit, you know, and say, hey, I grew up in a place like you grew, you know. So the entitlement sometimes comes without you, you know, without you trying for it. You know, the fact that you have to explain yourself into a situation because you may have achieved, you know, a certain level in your art, and then you go into a school and they're like, you know, big deal, you talk like a white person, and that's all, you know, that's all they know. You know, that's all they know, and so it's a constant kind of. I just consider myself a storyteller. You know, I think what I concentrate on is there's like a tunnel of energy going back and forth. I'm not doing anything that everyone in the audience can do this. You know, and what I hope is that people hear something that one of us did and said, hey, you know, I can do that. I'm going to go home, I'm going to write, or I have an idea for a story, or I'm going to find out where more of this is going on. So it's all about sort of building the community as opposed to let's see how apart from this community I can grow and how much I can achieve and how entitled I can be to take on everyone's story. And, you know, that's something that other people sort of build onto you. And it can hamper you after a while.
I mean, I think just by the fact that we're sitting here, I mean, it's just amazing. I mean, just the fact that we write poems, just the fact that we make our living writing poems, you know? I mean, I think where I feel like I sort of struggle and am sort of excited by questions of ownership and entitlement are that because I'm in this position, it's not so much that it better be good, but I better use it, I better be awake, I better be alive, I better keep watching myself, I better keep, you know, looking, you know, like learning more, reading more, you know, like, you know, in the 90s I ran for president, you know, and I will say I did it for, I mean, it was kind of the result of an evolution of writing poems, performing poems, noticing that I was not very comfortable reciting poems without, like I lacked body language, so I started to just improvise performances so that I could return to, but there was this whole process that had to do with being comfortable performing and speaking, and yet all that time what I kept feeling increasingly was the political nature of performance and being in rooms with groups of people in a time where I was starting to feel, I mean, it was during the AIDS crisis, it was during a time when there was just such a growth of the homeless population in New York. It was a time that just felt like rapidly political, you know, and I was sort of having this certain kind of awakening as a poet, and so I feel like it's sort of like, but all those conditions gave me the opportunity to start to see how the political awarenesses I was having could be used by me readily and easily. And before that, I hadn't felt entitled to. I felt like, how do I have access to the political? How can I use this information? How can I use these feelings? How can I make that speech? And it was almost just by adjusting my practice, you know, like not consciously, but maybe in response to levels of comfort and discomfort, and trying to just, you know, be, like I was saying before, be more unstuck. I started to, through those cracks of becoming more comfortable, I started to have more access to being able to put things together and to speak. And so I feel like it's sort of like, because we find ourselves in this position, and because it's sort of like we're like the flowers that the shit grew, you know. I mean, I feel like the culture, you know, like I feel like we're, you know what I mean? Like we're sort of like the culture grew us in a way, you know. I feel like as a poet, as a writer, it's sort of like, you know, like this kind of happened, you know. And so because this kind of happened, it's sort of like you have to, I feel like I personally have to keep finding ways to be open, you know, so that it keeps changing and growing and becoming something new, because that's my job, I think.
I like that you talked a little bit about your trajectory and how you had to adjust or evolve as a writer. And I'm wondering, there's a term that you coined a few decades ago in relation to your work, and that's lesbianity. And it's a term that continues to be used today in talking about your work. And I'm wondering, in what ways are any of these classifications, whether they come from within us or from outside, in what ways are they reductive, or in what ways are they, do they open up the conversation?
Well, I think when you perceive of yourself as speaking from a certain group or being a certain group, I feel like it becomes an aesthetic challenge, because you have to figure out how to be that and not be that, you know. And that's part of when you're moving along writing a poem, you're sort of juggling those intensities, you know, in the same way that when as a female, if somebody suddenly talks to me and I realize, oh, they're saying this because I'm a woman, you know, and I was like, oh my God, you know. And it's not that I suddenly want to say, I'm not a fucking woman, you know, I am a woman, you know, and I have to figure out how to be in both those positions, the one that's being projected on me and the one that is in fact true, and that I have some responsibility for not denying. And I feel the same way about being a queer. I mean, the word lesbianity, which I did make up, in part had to do with the fact, I mean, like, when you don't so much kill lesbians as just put them in mental hospitals. You know, the assumption is that if you're a female and you actually want to have any kind of loving sexual congress with other women, you're just like, a cultural bottom feeder. You're crazy, And it's like, we're just going to pack her away, I mean, because there's obviously something wrong with this person to not understand the hierarchy of things, and you do need a man, And so lesbianity is to say, no, I don't, or yes, I do, and no, I don't, and to be in that kind of, to celebrate that impossible position,
You can also, though, have a label that you kind of have to fight out of sometimes. I mean, the difference is if we're someplace and no one knows us, and Eileen and I both walk in, okay, when she starts doing her work, they will begin to gradually recognize who she is and what she represents. As soon as I walk in, they think they know who I am and what I represent. Because my physical appearance, they say, oh, well, this is an African-American poet, so she's going to do that kind of poem, she's going to do this, she believes this, she likes that, And sometimes it's you have to come out from under that, I mean, it's, yes, I'm an African-American poet, but to think therefore, what my perspective is and what kind of poetry I'm going to do is, I found it's a struggle sometimes, the same way as starting in performance and not graduating from, not studying poetry at first. If I'm really glad I came up the way that I did, and in the order that I did, But if someone is looking for a way to just discredit you, they'll go, oh, you're that, you're that performance person, you're that, And so it's like this albatross all of a sudden, and you wonder, well, how did that happen? It's because there's an expected, a sanctioned way to come up. Do this, get this degree, win that award, do this, get that degree, and shake that person's hand, and you are now officially a poet. And if you don't do that, you find yourself explaining why you didn't do it. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't study that, I didn't study with that person, I didn't go to Warren Wilson, I didn't go to, I'm sorry, anybody from Warren Wilson.
And work on the page is privileged over performance, which I think is a huge thing.
I had this really strange kind of moment where...
Can you pass the water?
No, and I'll tell you about the performance community. For a long time, we would glare, there was like, oh, we're the rebels, and we'd glare at the so-called academic poets, and they'd glare back like we weren't all using language, But I think what's behind a lot of it with the performance-oriented people, there's a lot of fright. There was a lot of kind of, oh, what if what I'm doing isn't really poetry? And then the other side was going, where are they getting these audiences from? Why can't I read my own poetry? Okay, So it was this whole back and forth. And I had this moment, I was reading with a guy named Reginald Gibbons, who at the time was editor of Tri-Quarterly. And I was reading, and you should have seen my work at the time. It was just one big block of no line breaks. I just wanted to get it down so I could read it. I wasn't paying any attention. So I was reading with him. I was very conscious of him being there because regardless of me saying rebel, he still represented, this is the real poetry world over here. This is the people with the grant money and all this stuff, So I'm reading, and he said, can I see that on the page? And I said, well, that's it. I'm going to give him this, and he's going to say, yeah, my suspicions are correct. They have no idea what they're doing. And I gave him this piece of paper, and he looked at it. He said, could you put your address on it? And I said, yeah. And then I got a contract to be in Tri-Quarterly, and I go, we are all doing the exact same thing, And so that was kind of the moment for me. But it does still, every once in a while, I haven't been on a stage doing a poetry slam in like a decade at least, and I still go places and get introduced as 4-time national slam champion. I'm looking around like, what? So what I've done since then in terms of writing and things like that, depending on what situation you're in, it's easy for them to say, oh yeah, and she does this writing thing too. And I work really hard at my writing, but it's something that if I had known it was going to be that hard to shake, I probably would have started earlier. you know, just sort of spanning those two, trying to span those two worlds. And I think there's a great juncture where I can get up anywhere and do a poem and not be afraid. I don't care if people are talking. I don't care if the cappuccino machine is on, you know. It's no big deal. But also, I wanted to learn the muscle and bone behind what I was doing. I wanted to learn prosody. I wanted to learn who the important poets were. I wanted to, you know, and I don't see why that's, you know, it's like an amusement park. It's fantastic.
Well, I want to say something that's always annoying to people, and that I've never felt privileged. I lived in a car for half a year with my mother like a dog, and all my family worked in a coffin factory in rural Pennsylvania, and I've always felt like garbage. And I'm the first person in my family to go to college, and then I got thrown out of college, so it didn't really count. And like, you know, I mean, yeah, I mean, here I am sitting here, and I just won the Pew Fellowship, which I never thought I would win. You know what I mean? Well, thanks. Woo! I mean, I only have a high school diploma, and, you know, I don't know. It's just, whenever this comes up a lot, you know, especially now that I've won this big award that's been blowing doors open for me all over the place. But, you know, I don't know what to say. Yes, I guess I should start saying that I am privileged. But it hasn't caught up with me yet, and, you know, I just, I'm happy, you know, I'm very happy, I'm very grateful. And, but I've never really understood I've never really felt that. I mean, you know, I can understand where some people would, but when I really honestly think about what privilege means, I've never really felt privileged. So.
But don't you think having a career is a privilege?
Career writing, yeah.
Yeah, I guess so. You know, the thing is, poetry really, to me, is something that I needed to do to not kill myself when I was younger. So, I don't know. I mean, it's just like, and then I just kept doing it, and I'm glad that I did, because so many people that I knew in my teens and 20s just stopped doing it. 90% of them, if not more, and the somatics, these new things I'm doing, they're really because I started doing them in 2005 because I wanted poetry to be something completely tangible all the time. You know, the poet Alice Notley says, poetry is so common hardly anyone can find it. And I think that that's so wise, and I don't know. The word privilege is very interesting to me. But I've never really, I mean, and I get people angry at me when I say that I've never really felt privileged, but I can't help it, so. Yeah, you can think I'm wrong, that's fine.
It's like we've discovered this second throat that we have, you know, and I think everyone has it, and something has happened to, like, you know, ours is flown open, and there's this other voice that we have. So it's like living these parallel lives, and I think that we're just incredibly blessed to have discovered that. You know, we're not shooting up post offices, and we're not, you know, when something happens to me, I go running for the page. You know, I go running for the page. I mean, that's my salvation, and it's gotten me through things that I don't think I would have survived otherwise. So in that sense, I think the privilege comes from that, not from someone saying, you have now done this long enough, and I'm now legitimizing you as a poet. I mean, that's, you know, don't get me wrong, money's great. You know, it's really nice, and it's you know, to be able to.
But I like that you said that it's a privilege that you learn to write to survive. I like that.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, because when
I've never thought of that as a privilege, but I guess it is.
When you said other people stopped, and you kept going, and you wonder, because when you go into schools, when I go into grade schools, the thing is, I say, oh, I'm here to teach you poetry. And then I wind up having to spend an entire class period just convincing the kids that their voices are legitimate. Like, I really am going to listen to what you're about to say. You know, so you're starting, you know, at zero with a lot of, you know, and to get it where I always find two kids or somebody who are having some kind of disagreement. And when I say write it out, they look at me like I'm nuts. You know, I'm going to go out and I'm going to beat the mess out of this. No, you're going to write out what, and then they realize they don't know what the hell they were mad at each other, you know. And it's like, and telling them, you know, pick up a pen and fight with the pen for a while, And you've got this throat. This is all yours. Everything you write belongs just to you. You can show people, you can not show people, whatever. And just introducing that concept early on that you have that. But every day, you know, I think that I wake up and the canvas is blank.
So,
you know, I can write whatever I want. I can tell whatever story. There's nothing like it.
so thinking about legitimacy and poetry coming from different places, that's something that you face all the time working with the People's Library and Occupy Wall Street, et cetera, Filip, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think entitlement and privilege and all of these things that we're talking about are I think of them as symptoms of this larger field, which I think is delusion. And there's this line, this beautiful line from the Shurangama Sutra that says, the only enemy is delusion. And so, like, I think of that and I think, okay, well, maybe writing, the act of writing or the act of gathering together is a way of illuminating these delusions, enacting them, critiquing them, analyzing them, performing them, so that they can be changed, so that we can see what they're made of and gradually dissect them and hopefully heal them. And that's really what I felt at Zuccotti Park last fall. I felt like I was in this wound that we were healing. It was this canyon that's usually called the Canyon of Heroes, but it's not the Canyon of Heroes. It's this huge wound, and we're between Ground Zero and Wall Street, and it's, you know, the 10th anniversary of 9/11 was celebrated in September, or not celebrated, but mourned. But it seemed like a celebration. It seemed like 10 years of war, let's go for 10 years more. You know, I mean, clearly we don't know how to mourn because we just, after the funeral, we pack up and go off and kill people and invade countries. So I felt like, among other things, we were there to teach each other how to mourn not just by commemorating the dead, but by manifesting an actual change, putting an obstacle in place with our bodies, getting out from behind the internet screen, getting out of our private spaces, going out with our bodies, with our sweat, with our blood, with mace in the eyeballs, with tears coming down, with people bleeding, with one person having an epileptic fit in handcuffs. You know, I mean, people, it was a sacrifice, but it's absolutely necessary because, as Mario Savia said at Berkeley, you have to put your body on the gears and on the levers if you want to make a change. And it's a continual process, and it's a continual failure and a continual success. And we just have to keep going. And one of the ways that we keep going is poetry. Poetry is this fuel that inspires us and that re-energizes us. And I mean, like the Poetry Assembly was crucial for that. Every Friday night we would gather and read poems to each other, 3 minutes each, sometimes with human mics, sometimes without. And it was totally healing, cathartic. New friendships were formed. It's love. It's a process of love that's going on in a place that pretends that love is the delusion and that capital is the reality. And we are constantly working to reverse that.
Filip, you, Stephen Boyer and Betsy Fagan are my heroes for that library in Occupy Wall Street. It was beautiful. It's an amazing, amazing thing. And when the police came in to tear it down, jumping in there to protect the book, I mean, it's just, it's epic what you, I mean, it's just, I love the three of you for it. So.
Thank you. I love you.
a lot of love here tonight. You guys, what you're saying makes me wonder if poetry is a sword, a kind of call to action, or to what extent is it a platform? Is it just an avenue for exchange, and is it both? And how do we encounter that? And how do we go about exploring that possible duality in our writing, in your writing?
We get together in public and do it. You know, we just get together. We meet wherever we can. We occupy. You know, we say, this is our space. We have to reclaim our space. You know.
And to occupy the English language, too. I mean, one of the things that's really strange, even thinking about privilege, too, is that we're using the coinage of the global whatever. I mean, it's like, you know, we're writing and talking and working in it. Everybody in the world is dominated by this language. You know, if they want to make a living, they've got to learn this language. They've got to use this language, you know. And when I've met poets in other countries, I remember going to Russia in the 90s, and I was all excited about meeting the Russian poets and having this exchange. And quickly, of course, I realized we're going to talk in my language in their country, and I was going to meet people who couldn't be published anymore because there were no publishing companies in Russia. If they were getting published at all, they were translating, you know, the most insipid American texts into Russian, and they were getting to, you know, I mean, like, what the paper was being used for was just an insult. You know, there was no small press anymore in Russia. There was no money. There was no nothing, and they couldn't write. There was a feeling of abandoning their own language. You know, which is like, what would that mean to have to abandon? You know, I mean, I guess I get very excited about thinking about writing another language as a choice, but if I were forced to not use English because there was no way to get the word out, it would be very different, you know? So it's interesting that we're part of what we're doing is occupying English in this different way and trying to think about how to use the quote master's tools in a different way, you know, and that being a part of the practice. Political.
I think that's so true, and it's really intense to use this term, occupy, to take these terms that are these demonic terms of control, you know, like derogatory, like and to perform this act of alchemy on them, where, you know, we're not occupying a foreign country. We're taking that word and we're throwing it into this purifying fire of action. We're saying we're occupying, or like, you know, the way that, you know, like queer used to be a derogatory term, and now it's a term of pride. And there's something really beautiful about that flipping.
Well, it depends on where you live. Where I grew up, it's still not something of pride, you know,
Right.
queer. But there are things in my new book that I'm doing with this conversation, like saving all your garbage for a week, and then having a map of the world, and then you trace, you can find any, you know, like any product that you buy, you can go onto their website and you can find out everybody they work with, like who's the paper maker, the print, and you can find out where they're from all over the world, and you trace on the map to your city where everything, like the factory, and it's all about oil consumption and just all this incredible consumption. And then you write on your garbage with a Sharpie pen these messages for rich people, and then you litter in wealthy neighborhoods. It's all about littering. I'm a big fan of littering. I've been a vegetarian since 1988 because, you know, I believe in this earth, but I do believe that Earth Day annoys me when people are like, it's just all about throwing things in the garbage can, you know, teaching kids to pick up litter, but it's really got nothing to do with, well, where is it coming from, and what fossil fuels are we using, and how many mountaintops are removed for the coal, for the electricity, et cetera, and, you know, I mean, like, I think littering is amazing because people can't, it's not in a landfill, and you're forced to see the shit that we are consuming, and you know, maybe the rich people won't like the messages, but maybe their kids will, and that's all that counts, really, getting their kids on our side. So, you know, and that's a conversation, but it's not the poem. The resulting poem is just the experience, but the act of mining the language is the political act.
I have one question to close this out, and then we'll go to a Q&A with the audience, if you guys have any questions. And it's a kind of fun question, this last one. I know that there are a lot of young writers here tonight. And Allen Ginsberg said, "I saw the best minds of my generation destroyed by madness, but also, follow your inner moonlight, don't hide the madness. What role does madness have in creativity? What advice do you have for new, possibly mad, young poets out there?"
Speak your madness. Speak it. Speak to it. Speak it directly. Show it. Talk about it with your friends openly. Don't be afraid of it. The thing that you're afraid of most is the thing that the person across from you is feeling and afraid to say also. So, and that creates this paranoia loop. And also, as Allen Ginsberg said, candor ends paranoia. And that's really the only antidote I can find for my own madness. So. And I find it with other people, too.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I think madness is the actual shape of your mind. I think writing is madness.
Yeah, that's true. I have a tiny little room on the first floor of my house, and it's got a white gate across from it. I have two humongous dogs, and I think I told myself I was putting the gate there to keep them out. And I have the little clock that you find that storekeepers hang up. I'll be back at, we can move the hands around. I put it out, and everybody can see me. It's not like a door. The gate's about this high, and I put the thing on the outside. Everybody leaves me alone. But at one point, I was working on a poem, working on it, and finally I made this big yelp because I'd had some kind of breakthrough. And my husband and my granddaughter came running to the door, and they're kind of looking at me like this, and I realized I had been in that room just coming out for bathroom breaks for 3 days. I had not bathed. They threw food in at me like I was a dog, I've been screaming, I'd scream these lines out, and I'd say no, and I'd throw a book down, and and they would just be, including the dogs, they'd just be walking this wide path around the door, And they understand, it's wonderful. They all just go, okay, she's going into her mode, she's crazy. She'll be up till 3 o'clock. She'll get up. She'll drink a little bit. She'll be eating like a cold burrito at 5. And then the poem happens, and we all have a little party. It's like the poem's here. Here's the poem. It's like a baby. Here's the poem. But yeah, I am certifiably insane. It's really. I think the poem. You get to the point where a poem inhabits your body. It's like a fever that lives inside of you, And that's why I know I'm doing exactly what I've meant to be doing, because nothing else enters my body that way. Nothing else, and nothing feels as good when it comes out into the world as a poem. So I think it's essential that you have people around you, at least one person who understands the madness, but that you give into it totally.
Give in to the madness. I like that message.
Well, I think one of my problems is that I don't believe I am crazy. So I think that men who don't wear purple nail polish are crazy. So they're the crazy ones. Can I just answer you by reading a very short quote from Mina Loy, one of my favorite poets? This is something she said in an interview in 1917. If you are very frank with yourself and don't mind how ridiculous anything that comes to you may seem, you will have a chance of capturing the symbol of your direct reaction. The antique way to live and express life was to say it according to the rules. But the modern flings herself at life and lets herself feel what she does feel. Then upon the very tick of the second, she snatches the images of life that fly through the brain. She was crazy. She's great. Mina Loy.
I think that quote and these poets deserve a round of applause.
Thank you.
Do we have any questions from the audience? Okay, well, here we go.
Well, hi. I was wondering, and this is for all 4 panelists and all 4 poets, what do you predict will happen in the future regarding the relationship between poetry and Occupy Wall Street and the United States government and the genocide occurring in Iraq? What's your prediction for the next decade?
Maybe how political poetry will continue to evolve.
I really don't have a lot of hope. So I really firmly believe that the oil is running out, and that's why we're doing all these terrible things we're doing. I think that the luxuries that we have today we don't see, but we're going to see one day soon as luxuries. I really feel like our lives are going to change dramatically soon. It takes 7 gallons of oil to make 1 tire. We need so much oil to keep this country going. And I love electricity. I love phones. I love my computer. But I know that it's all just, it's tenuous, you know, at best. I'm not very hopeful about it, anything right now. So.
I agree that it's going to get, I think it's going to get worse and worse and kind of more terrible publicly and more chaotic. But I do also think that I think we're in a very strange and wonderful position for poets and poetry, because I think our you know, like I think the poet's just going to be increasingly a public figure, you know, not just a poet, but many poets. I mean, I think that the kind of like uncontrollable expression of poetry is just going to be increasingly valued and be something that's going to be welcomed in a way that it hasn't been for, you know, decades, you know. Because I think we've been a cartoon. We're always a different cartoon every decade, you know, the poet, you know. And I think that's starting to fall away because we're kind of a mouthpiece, you know, or the second throat that Patricia mentioned, you know. And I think we're going to become more necessary, especially as people put down the media and feel overwhelmed by all the other devices. We're going to be a very singular device that will be invited.
I was in Germany once, and they'd had this great thing where they loaded a bunch of poets onto a train, and the train just went across the countryside, and then they would stop, and there would be like a town square, and there'd be a band out, and you know, kids playing, and the poets would get off, and they would read, and then they'd get back on the train and go to the next place. And so I was in Berlin when the train came back for the last when they came back home. The station was so crammed that they had to close the Berlin train station down. There were people holding posters with the poets' faces on them. There were flags. And the doors of the train would open, and there were so many people. They had to pass the poets over their heads to get them out. You know, and I'm sitting there going, and then the difference, and then I came back home. It's like, oh, you're a poet, big deal. The difference between there and here is, you know, they look to the poets for the real news. And I think that we're not quite there yet, but if poets can just realize that we need to stop always reading to other poets and use what we can to worm our way into these spaces where people haven't heard or don't know that poems aren't all about flowers growing through concrete, you know. You know, for instance, I'm going to be reading at the next Dodge Festival, and I'm going to the, they said, oh, do you want to go to the big press conference that's announcing the festival and read some poems? And I'm like, ugh, that sounds awful. And they said, well, you know, Cory Booker will be there with some people. And I was like, access to Newark's mayor. Okay, it's a start, you know. And then you get in and you read something that's going to push as opposed to something that's going to comfort, you know, and you don't know what effect that's going to be. So I think getting into spaces where we're not normally invited in that nice, oh, let's have a poet wind things up so we can go, you know, home smiling type way. Don't send them home smiling, ever.
I try to resist prediction as much as possible because it makes me feel too much vertigo. But I would say instead, I want to just concentrate on today, what I can do right now, what I can do each day. Things really do look bleak, but ultimately it doesn't matter if I mean, it matters, of course it matters, but even if we do fail, we still have to try. We still have to try to change this cycle of catastrophes that is capitalism as we are living in it.
We have time for one more question.
Can I just say one more thing of like what Patricia was saying about in Germany? In Philadelphia, some friends of mine and I, Frank Sherlock, Maitali Jagannathan, we started something called PACE. It's an acronym, Poet Activist Community Extension. It's also the Italian word for peace, pace. And what it is we would make broadsides and we would go out onto the street and read them to anybody who would hear them. And we found out right from the beginning that everybody wanted to hear those. And we did it, the first one was on Christmas Eve, right after we invaded Baghdad. And all of our poems were about the invasion, and everybody wanted to talk about it. And so we were surprised, and it was kind of like, I think you're right, we haven't arrived yet, and that's like, how to get out there. And it's like weirdly comforting to be out there with strangers, showing them your little poem on a piece of paper. And
yeah, there were a group of poets who just got on subways for a while and just would put a little box in the middle of the subway car and do a poem and then get off at the next stop.
That sounds great.
Yeah. That's it. And people were like, and they wanted more. It's like, okay, if I keep writing this line, maybe I'll see them again.
One last question. Poetry in Motion.
Poetry in Motion is coming back.
Poetry in Motion is back. You can see it on the subways and on the Metro cards.
The body is back. The body is back because we're meeting again physically, bodily. We're retaking public spaces which are ours. And I love to see that coming back.
That's totally the answer to the political and poem meeting. The body is back. I think that's totally cool.
I just want to say, too, that as a poet, I really don't feel like it's my job to be a motivational speaker. So I'm not here to, like, make everybody feel good. So I just always like to point that out.
And on that note, we conclude Red, White, and Blue, Thoughts on Politics. Thank you so much.